I've been working in clay for about maybe 20 years now, off and on. Basically, during the last 7 years, I've really been focused in on it. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't do something in my studio. I really believe in the continuity that that gives me. I was always interested in three-dimensional art, and I'm specifically interested in sculpture because it just allows me to say things that I'm not able to say in words. And I just go to another place when I'm sculpting, you know? It's like time stops. I work in several different mediums. One that is not shown here is a monoprint process that I've just started doing, where I paint on a slab of plaster with underglazes, and then I take and I throw down a slab of clay. I roll really quickly, and I pull it off, and I get a monoprint, a single print. So that's not shown here, but the other two things that I do, I work in raku, and I live out in Red Mountain. My husband and I only have one set of neighbors within a mile. So we just walk down our front steps and go out, and we set up our kiln out there. And the raku process, which is essentially a Japanese process, you take the lid off when the kiln is red hot. And then I take tongs and I put the pieces into a trash barrel full of newspaper and slap a lid on. Fire seeks oxygen. When the oxygen is gone within the trash can, it goes into the glaze and into the clay, and it creates chemical changes in the oxygen that's bonded in the clay. And that's where you get those tremendous metallic looks. And I love that. I love the spontaneity. I love the fact that it's different every time. The other process that I use that is seen in my totem poles is cone 6 stoneware firing. And that means that it can be outside. I think that if it were snowing, I would want you to put a cover over it, because ice, if it collects in the cracks of ceramics, you know, yeah, ice expands and it can ruin the ceramic after a while. But anything else, rain, sun, it's all fine with my totem poles. They've been out in my garden for 7 or 8 years now. So the totem poles that you see in the room are done in that manner. During my life, I have traveled extensively in Mexico, Central America, and South America. I think if you added up all the time that I've spent in these places, maybe it would be going on 3 years over a lifetime. So I'm affected by pre-Columbian art. I'm affected by the transition and the crossover between animal and human, how connected they felt to their world, and the beautiful, beautiful ceramics that they have that are animal creations. My art really shows a childhood fascination with nature stories. I don't know, Thornton Burgess is a name that's familiar to some. He was a nature writer, you know, Aesop's Fables, many, many other things. I just really, anthropomorphism is very enticing to me. I've been working at Desert Area Resources and Training for about 9 years now. And since 2007, we've had a very successful art class over there. The Matarango Museum has really been supportive to us in a lot of ways. We've been part of the Open Studio Tour the last few years. And it's really, really given our consumers a way to be part of the community and to show the community the things that they have going for them.
And your consumers are?
And our consumers are persons with various types of developmental disabilities.
For lamp working, which is what they call glass blowing with a torch, the glass comes in rods that are maybe 1/4 of an inch in diameter and maybe 12 to 14 inches long. So you start with solid rods of glass, and each rod is a different color. The torch that I use is maybe this big. It's not terribly big. It's got 2 sources. It's got a propane source on it and an oxygen source. And so you adjust those two gases until you get a flame that's the right temperature for what you want to do. Then you slowly introduce the glass rods into that flame. If you introduce them too fast, the glass will shock and it will shatter and explode into lots of little pieces. So you have to slowly get the glass warmed up and gradually get it up to a melting temperature. And once the glass rod, the very tip of it will melt, but because glass is an insulator, you can hold on to the glass rod without your hands getting too hot. And so then you can manipulate the glass rods. If you're making a marble, you get a round ball of glass. If you're making a sculpture, you stick on small pieces of glass and you stretch them out, or you use tools to manipulate them to get certain shapes. If you're making beads, you use a piece of metal rod, very thin rod that's been coated in a special coating, and you wrap the glass around that rod. And then after the glass cools, when you pull the glass off the metal rod, there's a hole left through the metal, and that's how you get the hole in the bead. I got started with lamp working by accident. My mother actually worked in stained glass for many years, and one day she and I were out exploring a quilt store and we saw a glass studio, and we thought, well, let's go check out the glass studio and see what stained glass things they have that we might be interested in. And we went to the studio, and it turned out it wasn't a stained glass studio, it was a lamp working studio. And the time that we happened to stop by was right in the middle of one of their beginner classes. So we got to see some demonstrations and understand what a beginner class would be like, and I signed up right away to take a class after that. Ooh, it's hard to pick just one favorite part. I really like things that involve manipulating tubing. So instead of rods that come as solid glass rods, you can buy tubing glass so that it's hollow in the middle. And then once it's hollow in the middle and the glass is hot, you can blow air into it and expand it out into something larger, which is how you make things like goblets, which are one of my favorite things to make. I think just the idea of collaborating with other people on the pieces was the biggest influence for me, because usually I'll make, say, a set of 5 to 7 beads for someone else to turn into jewelry, or I'll just make a single piece of glass that's a pendant to wear on a necklace. So the idea of making a set of beads that were going to become something larger, or a set of sculptures that were going to be part of a larger sculpture, was something very different than what I usually do.
I'm originally from California, and I started out as a soft textile artist, and I finished up in that part of my career as a costume maker for theater, which I decided wasn't my thing after a while. I got accepted into a gallery on the East Coast for my clothing, and then I went and switched when I decided that I wasn't going to be pleasing myself by continuing on that same path. So I started doing collages, and then I started making small shrines that looked kind of like Mexican little nichos, or whatever you call them. And then I wasn't satisfied. I couldn't find anything to go further, so I started taking some retreats and started taking classes from some assemblage artists, and that's how it started to develop. And then when I moved back to the West Coast, I started doing what I call body adornment, which is jewelry made with cold connections. Cold connection is anything that you put together, layers of things, or a joint, or something that is not glued or is not touched with flame, like solder. Most of the time I use wire to make rivets or make hinges, or I even do it in my shrines, not just my jewelry. So that's what a cold connection is, and I love it because it's one of the most challenging things you could do, because you have to think so far ahead instead of just slapping glue on it. Well, assemblage is just a fancy way to say, obviously, assembling. You just take found objects and merge them together to look cohesive and sometimes even more organic. Yeah. Well, Desert Muses is something I kind of thought up to coerce or invite some of my friends who hadn't had a lot of exposure in a bigger arena, such as a gallery, to put themselves out there. And it's mostly for women. It's not set up for any set thing, but it's for different women's studios in the IWV to join forces together and be supportive and go out from there and do something collaborative such as this exhibit. Because resources are so limited here for exposure, there are small little groups in and out of different towns, and this is where I live now in Ridgecrest, so I decided that it would be a good idea to focus and try and get exposure here out in the desert. This is what I'm calling a spirit doll. It's a representation of something that is inside of me, and I am fascinated with the world of performance magic. And this is basically talks of, and it turns, see, I love it, how it turns. This is, instead of being the assistant who has to hide everything and knows all the magician's tricks, she's empowered, and she knows everything, and she knows how to pull it all together, and she's the one who's really the one who's empowered. And a lot of this, there is some glue, but almost, I would say about 80% of this is actually cold connected. It's either been sewn, or these little cards have been kind of riveted together with little pieces of wire going all the way up. There's no glue on any of those cards. They just sit and spiral around that. So. And then I asked some of the other artists in the show to make dolls too. So if you had come into the show while it was up or come into it while it's up, you'll get to see those other spirit dolls.
Excellent.
All right.
Very good.
That's it.
All right.
All right.